Some men raise a glass to celebrate. I raise mine to remember every single word being said about my daughter in a language they thought I'd never understand. Smile, David. Just smile and pour the wine. That's what I kept telling myself at that elegant table, watching the horror unfold. My life before all of this was simple, good, but simple. I'm David, a craftsman. I build things with my hands. Custom homes, intricate furniture, things meant to last a lifetime. My workshop is my sanctuary, filled with the scent of cedar and sawdust. My greatest creation, though, has always been my daughter, Chloe. She's everything to me. We live in a quiet, coastal town in Oregon, a place where the air smells of pine and salt, and the rhythm of the tides dictates your day. My world was peaceful until Marc-Antoine walked into it. He was charming, handsome, a man of refined European tastes, or so he presented himself. He swept Chloe off her feet, and honestly, a part of me was thrilled for her. When he asked for her hand, tears in his eyes, I gave my blessing. I wanted my daughter to be happy, truly happy. So, Wes' parents, Monsieur and Madame Dubois, flew in from Spain for an engagement dinner. I went all out. I booked the most exclusive farm-to-table restaurant in the valley, with panoramic views of the vineyards. I wanted them to feel welcomed, to see that our corner of the world, though not Paris, had its own beauty. I wanted Chloe to look around that table and see her entire future family getting along. I didn't get that. I got something else entirely, and it started with a wine list. David, is this the Tempranillo you selected? Monsieur Dubois asked, holding the bottle like it was a prop in a bad play. His Spanish accent, thick and theatrical, made every word sound like a judgment. In Spain, we would not serve this with a paella. It's Oregon wine, actually, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Local vineyard, about 20 minutes from here. Monsieur Dubois set the bottle down, like it had a noxious odor. Ah, how resourceful. Madame Dubois offered me a saccharine smile, the kind you give a child who's just shown you a slightly off-kilter drawing. And what is it you do again, David? She asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. Construction? She said the word like it was something dirty, something you need to scrub off your hands. Craftsmanship, I corrected, keeping my expression neutral. I build things, mostly custom homes and fine woodworking now. How practical, Madame Dubois purred, then turned back to her wine, dismissing me. Practical, like I'd told her I collected lint. I let it go. Chloe was laughing at something Marc-Antoine said, her hand resting in his. And that, right there, that was worth every backhanded compliment these two could throw at me over a plate of artisanal paella. I've been broke. I've slept in my old beat-up truck between jobs. Too proud to call my own father for help when I was younger. I know how to eat condescension with a smile. You do it for the people you love. What I didn't expect was for them to think I couldn't hear the real thing. Here's what nobody in that restaurant knew about me. Not Marc-Antoine, not his parents. Not even Chloe. Not really. Before I started my own business, I spent 4 years working on infrastructure projects across Europe in my 20s. Spain, mostly near Valencia and Granada. I didn't go to some fancy language school. I learned the way you learn anything worth knowing, by getting yelled at by foremen until you understood every single word. I came home fluent, and then I came home quiet about it, because nobody at a job site in rural Oregon cares if you can conjugate a verb. It never came up. It never mattered. Until it did. About halfway through the meal, Monsieur Dubois leaned toward Madame Dubois and said something low in Spanish, a small, dismissive laugh escaping him. And Madame Dubois, thinking she was safe, thinking the dumb American craftsman across the table was just a man who built decks, answered him in Spanish, like flipping a switch. They think I'm furniture. I kept my face still. I kept cutting my chicken, and I listened. They talked about Chloe's dress first. Madame Dubois called it bonita para algo de la tienda, pretty for something off a rack. Then Monsieur Dubois mocked the way I pronounced charcuterie earlier, doing an impression that made Madame Dubois laugh into her napkin. Small stuff. Cruel, but small. The kind of thing you could let slide if you had to. Then Madame Dubois glanced past my shoulder, toward the restaurant's little gallery of local artists. a habit of theirs, displaying pieces from craftspeople around the county. And there, framed under glass, was a photo of a hand-carved cedar chest. My cedar chest. The one I'd spent 6 months building for Chloe's room when she was a little girl, out of reclaimed timber from an old barn that used to stand on our property. I'd sanded every inch by hand, carved every detail. Chloe kept her childhood treasures in it until she left for college. Madame Du Bois tilted her head at it and said quiet, amused, "Probablemente lo encuentro en un bajuro. Los Americanos no tienen gusto. Simplemente torna madera barata. Why lo lamen artesania?" He probably found it at a dump. Americans have no taste. They just bolt cheap wood together and call it craftsmanship. I set my fork down. Not hard, not a scene, just down, deliberate. The kind of quiet that, if you knew me, you'd know meant something had shifted. She was talking about the chest I built for my little girl. She was talking about 6 months of my life like it was garbage I scraped off a curb. Nobody at that table noticed. Marc-Antoine was refilling his water. Chloe was checking her phone under the table, smiling at something. Madame Du Bois took a slow sip of wine, pleased with herself, like she just delivered a punchline at a party where nobody spoke her language. Except I did. I looked up. Monsieur Du Bois caught my eye first. Just a glance, testing whether the American had noticed anything. I smiled at him, easy warm, the kind of smile that says everything's fine here. You know, I said in English, said in my napkin in my lap, I've always thought the things people build with their own hands say more about them than anything they could buy. Don't you agree, Monsieur Du Bois? Monsieur Du Bois blinked. Of course. Good, I said. I'd hate for anyone at this table to think I don't know the difference between something cheap and something that lasts. I let that sit there for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough. Not too long. You have no idea what you just said in front of me, and I'm not going to tell you. Not yet. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, dessert plates cleared. Madame Du Bois leaned toward Marc-Antoine. Not Monsieur Du Bois this time. Marc-Antoine, her own son, and asked, casual as asking about whether, "Están listos los papers?" Are the papers ready? Marc-Antoine nodded, barely looking up from his espresso. La semana que viene, creo. Next week, I think. I kept my face exactly where it was. Pleasant. Interested in nothing but my coffee. Papers. What papers? Ready for what? I didn't get the rest of it right then. That came later, in pieces, over the next few days, the way these things do. But I got enough. I got a name. Fiducie Trust. And I got a phrase from Monsieur Du Bois that turned my stomach in a way Madame Du Bois' comment about the cedar chest never could. El padre está tan desesperado por la approbation. Y es patetico. The father is so desperate for approval. It's pathetic. And then Marc-Antoine, my daughter's fiancé, the man who'd asked me for my blessing 4 months ago with tears actually in his eyes, or so I thought, actually chuckled and said, "Por eso funciona. Quer que Chloe si feliz ten desesperadamente for Mark cualquier cosa. Te dice que es predecible. That's why it works. He wants Chloe to be happy so badly he'll sign anything. I told you he's predictable." Then he turned, right on cue, like flipping a switch, back to English, and took Chloe's hand across the table. "You having a good time, babe?" he asked her, that same warm, doting look on his face he'd had since day one. "The best," Chloe said and leaned over to kiss his cheek. "He's not marrying my daughter. He's performing marrying my daughter." And I just watched the rehearsal. I sat there with my coffee going cold in front of me, watching the man my little girl was about to build a life with hold her hand with the same hand he just used to call her father predictable. And worse, to call her a means to an end I still didn't fully understand yet. I wanted to stand up. Every part of me wanted to stand up right then, throw that napkin on the table, and ask Monsieur Du Bois in his own language exactly what papers he was so eager to have ready. Don't. Not yet. Not here. Because here's the thing about being a father, something you learn the hard way. If you blow up in a restaurant over something your daughter can't even hear, you're not the hero of that story. You're just a jealous, controlling dad who ruined her engagement dinner. Chloe would defend Marc-Antoine. She'd apologize to his parents on my behalf. and I would have handed them exactly what they wanted. A reason to paint me as the unreasonable one before this thing had even started. So I smiled. I paid the check, cash tip, the whole 9 yards. And I walked my daughter and her fiancé's parents out to the valet. And I shook Monsieur Dubois' hand. And I told Madame Dubois the evening had been wonderful. And I meant every word of it in a way she'll never understand until it's far too late for her to do anything about it. I got in my truck, an old Ford Ranger I've had since before Chloe could walk, patched up more times than I can count. And I sat in the parking lot for a long time before I turned the key. They think I'm a fool. They think this is already over. I thought about that cedar chest. I thought about 6 months of sanding and carving for a piece of furniture Madame Dubois called garbage, without knowing the man who built it was sitting 6 feet away, listening to every word. I thought about papers. I thought about the word predictable, and how it was said about my own daughter like she was a line item in somebody's spreadsheet. And I made myself a promise, right there in that parking lot. Engine idling, hands on the wheel. I'm not going to say a word. Not yet, but I am going to find out exactly what they think they're getting away with. And when I do, I'm going to let them explain it to me themselves, in whatever language they're most comfortable using. I put the truck in reverse, drove home slow, the way I always do on nights when my head's too full to trust myself with a yellow light. Chloe texted me before I even got in the door. Dad, thank you for tonight. It meant everything to me that you tried so hard with them. I sat in my driveway and read that message twice. She has no idea what I heard tonight, and it's going to break her heart when she finds out, but it's going to break a lot cleaner than what they've got planned for her. I texted back, anything for you, sweetheart. Get some sleep. Then I called an old buddy of mine from my Spain days, a man named Sam Miller, who'd gone into corporate risk consulting after he left the field. The kind of guy who knew people in Europe. It was almost midnight. He picked up on the third ring. Withers, it's been years. Everything all right? No, I said, I need a favor, and I need you to be very, very good at what you do. They thought the hardest part was already behind them. They thought all that was left was paperwork. They had no idea I was the paperwork. Give them exactly what they expect. A grateful, clueless father-in-law who just wants his little girl happy. That became my job for the next 3 weeks. Not craftsman, not father. Actor. The morning after the dinner, I called Chloe before I even made coffee. Hey, sweetheart. I was thinking, why don't Monsieur and Madame Dubois stay at the guest cottage for the rest of the week? Save them the drive back and forth from their hotel in Portland. Let them really get a feel for how we do things out here. There was a pause on the line. Dad, are you sure? I know last night was a lot. It was more than you know, I thought. Chloe, I want this family thing to work, I said. And every word of it was true, just not in the way she thought. Let me do this. She got quiet, and I could hear the relief in it. That would mean so much. Thank you, Dad. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a second, looking out at the guest cottage across the yard. The one I'd built with my own 2 hands the same summer I built that cedar chest, back when Chloe was still small enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call a helping. You want a front row seat to my life? Fine, come on in. Just remember, I can hear you from every room in this house, in every language you've got. Monsieur and Madame Dubois moved into the guest cottage that Thursday. Marc-Antoine stayed at Chloe's place in town, which was its own kind of relief. One less performance to manage under my own roof. And for the better part of a week, I played my part like I'd been rehearsing for it my whole life. I asked Madame Dubois about her rose garden back in Valencia. I let Monsieur Dubois correct my grilling technique on a Sunday cookout, Oregon-style salmon. Cedar smoke rolling off my old offset smoker in the backyard, and Monsieur Dubois standing there with a glass of wine, telling me the fish would be better with a proper marinade. I nodded. I smiled. I said, I'll have to try that sometime, while internally cataloging every syllable that came out of his mouth like evidence. Because it was evidence. I just wasn't filing it in a courtroom yet. You want to underestimate me? Good. That's the only weapon I need. Thursday night, after Monsieur and Madame Dubois turned in early, jet lag, they claimed, though I had a hunch it was something else keeping them tired, I sat in my truck in the driveway with my phone and called Sam Miller back. "Talk to me," I said. "What did you find?" Sam didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Never did. David, I've been doing this a long time. This one's ugly. Here we go. Monsieur Dubois Company. The import business he keeps bragging about? It's a shell, barely operational. Filed for what's basically the Spanish equivalent of a restructuring 2 years ago and never recovered. There are tax liens stacked on the family estate in Valencia, going back 3 years. We're talking real numbers. David, numbers that don't get fixed by selling off a wine cellar." I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the dark windows of my own guest cottage like I could see through the walls. "And Marc-Antoine?" I asked. Sam exhaled, and that told me before he even said it. Marc-Antoine's got an active civil suit against him back in Spain. Failed business venture. Some kind of import-export scheme that went south 2 years ago. Took a handful of investors down with it. Nothing criminal, but it's not nothing either. And David, he never mentioned any of this to your daughter. Never. Not one word. "There's more," Sam said. "You mentioned they've been talking about some kind of trust arrangement, postnuptial. They're calling it estate planning. I bet my house it's not estate planning, David. Sounds a lot more like a lifeline. If they can get access to your commercial waterfront property through a joint trust, especially anything structured offshore, that's liquidity. That's collateral. That's a way to keep the whole thing from collapsing without anyone back home ever knowing how bad it got." I sat in the dark for a long moment after we hung up, letting it all settle. They didn't fly 6,000 miles to welcome me into their family. They flew 6,000 miles because I own something they need. I thought about Chloe's face at that dinner. The way she'd looked at Marc-Antoine like he hung the moon. The way she'd texted me that night. "Thank you for trying so hard with them." Thinking her father was the one who needed to prove himself. She has no idea she's the one being auditioned. And she has no idea for what. I didn't sleep much that night. The opportunity came that Sunday. I invited them to brunch on the back patio. Oregon berry compote, homemade biscuits, and a fine Spanish roast. I knew Monsieur Dubois couldn't criticize. "Mark." Monsieur Dubois began, setting his coffee down and adopting his smooth, practiced charm. "Julian tells us you own substantial commercial acreage near the highway. In Europe, family wealth is consolidated. We are preparing a joint family trust draft through our estate attorneys. Something to protect Molly and Julian long-term. We'd like to review it with you before the wedding." He didn't hand me a pen. He was probing, testing if the dumb contractor would bite before paying his lawyers to finalize the paperwork. "Family to family," Madame Dubois added softly. "It's how we protect our children." "That sounds real generous," I said, scratching my jaw like a man trying hard to grasp a big concept. "I build houses, Madame Dubois. I don't know much about fancy trusts. Why don't you have your people send the draft directly to me? I'll review it." I watched the subtle glint of triumph in Monsieur Dubois' eyes. He thought he'd baited the hook, and I was swimming right into the net. That night, I sat alone in my study with that folder spread out across my desk, reading line after line of language that might as well have been in Spanish for how little sense it made to me. Terms like irrevocable trust structure. Terms like beneficial interest transfer. My eyes kept sliding off the page. I built a house with my own 2 hands. I can read a blueprint upside down in the rain. I cannot make heads or tails of this. I almost didn't call. 20-some years of handling my own business, my own contracts, my own bad breaks. There's a pride in that, a stubbornness, and it doesn't like admitting when it's out past its depth. But I thought about Chloe. I thought about her signing something like this one day, with a smile on her face, thinking it was a wedding gift. I picked up the phone at 10 p.m. and called Ethan Cole, my attorney, a guy I'd used for every land deal and contract dispute since I started my business 15 years ago. "Ethan, it's David. Sorry for the hour." David Withers, calling after 9. "This can't be good," Ethan said, and I could hear him settling into a chair on the other end. "What's going on?" "I can't make heads or tails of this offshore trust nonsense," I said, and I read him 3 lines straight off the page, slow so he could follow. There was a long pause on his end, long enough that my stomach dropped before he even said a word. "David," Ethan said, his voice dropping into that flat, deadpan tone he uses when someone tries to commit a felony. This isn't a prenup, and it's not a family gift. It's an offshore cross-collateralization agreement. I gripped the phone tighter. Explained that in Carpenter terms, Ethan, they've structured this trust so that your commercial property acts as the primary loan guarantor for Monsieur Dubois' European entity. Ethan explained. If his business defaults, which Sam's research proves it's about to, the offshore lenders have an immediate, unappealable lien against your land. You aren't giving Chloe a trust fund, David. You're signing a confession that makes your life's work pay off their foreign debts. I sat back in my chair. There it is. I'm going to need you to send me everything you have, Ethan said. Every document. Tonight, if you can. You'll have it in 10 minutes, I said. I hung up the phone and sat there in quiet in my study, and something in my chest went very, very still. They weren't trying to marry into my family. They were trying to buy it, and they were going to use my own daughter's wedding day to do it. I thought about the cedar chest again. I thought about he's predictable, and the father is so desperate for approval, and every single small cruelty they let slip in a language they thought was a locked door. You didn't outsmart me. You just underestimated the wrong father. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not the hot kind of angry. Anyway, what settled into me that night was colder than that, steadier. I'm not a mastermind. I'm just a man who knows when to ask for help, and I've got help now. The next morning, I found Monsieur Dubois on the back patio with his coffee. Same spot as always. Looking out over my property like a man surveying land he already considered half his. Not yet, Monsieur Dubois. Not ever, actually, but you don't know that yet. Morning, I said, sitting down across from him. I read through that folder last night. He set his cup down, attentive now, that same practice warmth sliding onto his face. And honestly, it's a lot, I said, running a hand to my hair like a man genuinely overwhelmed. This sounds wonderful for Chloe. I really do believe that. But I want to do this right. Let me have my family attorney draft a clean, updated master contract. Something simple, something everyone can understand. And we sign it together, all of us, at the rehearsal dinner in front of the whole family. I watched it land on his face. The flicker of surprise quickly smoothed over into something like delight. That's a wonderful idea, David, Monsieur Dubois said. And I had believed every word of it if I hadn't heard what I'd heard a week before. A signing in front of everyone. Very meaningful. You have no idea how meaningful. Madame Dubois came out onto the patio just then, drawn by the warmth in her husband's voice. And when Monsieur Dubois told her the plan, she actually clasped her hands together. Oh, David, she said, this means so much to us. It means a lot to me, too, I said. And that part, at least, was true. They believed it. I could see it in both their faces. The quiet, private triumph of two people who thought they'd successfully played the fool into signing away his own future. I could practically hear the math running behind Monsieur Dubois' eyes. Days now. Just days, and the estate is saved. And nobody back home ever needs to know how close it came. Let them believe that. Let them pour themselves another glass of my wine and toast to it tonight. It's the last thing they're going to get to celebrate at my expense. The days between that patio conversation and the rehearsal dinner moved slow and fast all at once. Slow in the way waiting always is. Fast in the way a countdown feels once you know exactly what's coming. Ethan worked with me every evening, building out the real story into something clean and undeniable. The tax liens, the lawsuit, the exact language buried in that trust that would have handed my land to a man across an ocean. Sam sent over documentation. Translated, notarized, airtight. And every day I still smiled across the table at Monsieur Dubois. Still let Madame Dubois correct the way I said paella. Still let Marc-Antoine shake my hand and call me Papa with that easy grin of his. Like we were already family. Like he hadn't sat at a table 2 weeks earlier and called my daughter predictable to his own parents. Keep smiling, Marc-Antoine. You've got no idea what's waiting for you. Chloe, for her part, floated through those 2 weeks, the happiest I'd seen her in years. Planning seating charts, picking out her rehearsal dinner dress, texting me pictures of centerpiece options like my opinion on floral arrangements had ever mattered to anyone. Dad, what do you think? White roses or the wild anemone mix. I stared at that text for a long time before I answered. Wild anemones. Because in about a week, sweetheart, I'm going to hand you back a life that's actually yours. And I wanted to look like something that grew here, not something imported. Wild anemones, I texted back. Always. The rehearsal dinner was set for that Saturday. String lights ordered. The good china out. Monsieur and Madame Du Bois sipping champagne on my dime. Believing with everything in them that this was the night they finally won. Let them believe it. Let them raise their glasses. I've got a toast of my own coming. The string lights went up across the back patio that Saturday evening, threading through the old oak trees I'd planted the same year Chloe was born. Long tables draped in white linen, wild anemone centerpieces, mason jars stuffed with foxglove and Queen Anne's lace, the way Chloe wanted. 40 of our closest people laughing, drinking, passing plates of Oregon salmon and grilled vegetables down the table like it was any other summer gathering, except it wasn't. And I was the only one at that party who knew it. Monsieur and Madame Du Bois held court near the head of the table, champagne flutes in hand. My champagne, from a case I bought specifically for this night, though not for reason they thought. Madame Du Bois wore a silk gown that probably cost more than my first truck. Monsieur Du Bois had that same easy, patronizing smile he'd worn since the night we met, like he was doing all of us a favor just by showing up. 2 more hours, Monsieur Du Bois. Enjoy the view. I caught Madame Du Bois leaning toward Marc-Antoine near the drink table, her voice low, her eyes on me across the yard. I wasn't close enough to hear all of it, not with the band warming up and 40 conversations happening at once. But I didn't need to hear all of it. I'd heard enough of these two by now to fill in the rest, just from the shape of her mouth and the smug little tilt of her chin. De todos modos, Mirolo sonriendo, she said, and I caught that much, clean across the noise. Look at him smiling. Marc-Antoine smirked into his glass and said something back I couldn't catch. But I didn't need the words. I'd heard that tone before at the restaurant, over paella and a cedar chest they thought was garbage. Go ahead. Enjoy the last few minutes of thinking you've won. Ethan was there too, off to the side in a blazer, nursing a club soda, looking every bit like a family friend, and nothing like the man holding a folder in his car that was about to end 2 people's entire con. He caught my eye once, gave me the smallest nod. Ready when you are. I looked over at Chloe. She was laughing with her college roommates near the dessert table, her rehearsal dinner dress catching the string lights. Happier than I'd seen her in longer than I could remember. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm about to break your heart tonight, but I'd rather break it now than watch them break it slowly for the rest of your life. One lie at a time. I picked up my glass, tapped it once with my ring, the sound cutting clean through the noise of the party. Conversations dropped off one by one, until the only sound left was a cricket starting up in the treeline, and somewhere behind me, a string light buzzing faintly on its cord. If everybody could give me just a minute, I said, standing at the head of the table, I promise I won't keep you from the salmon for long. That got a laugh. Good. Let them stay loose. Let them stay comfortable a little while longer. Most of you know me. I don't love speeches. I'd rather be up on a roof, somewhere than up here with all of you looking at me. Another easy laugh. Chloe beamed at me from her seat. That same soft, grateful look she'd had since that first dinner. Thank you for trying so hard with them. I did try, sweetheart. Just maybe not the way you think. But my daughter's getting married in 2 weeks, I said. And I've spent every day since she was born trying to give her the kind of life where she never has to wonder if she's loved, where she never has to wonder if somebody's telling her the truth. I let that sit a second. My eyes moved just briefly to Marc-Antoine. He was still smiling, still holding his glass loose in one hand, still playing part of a man with absolutely nothing to hide. Not for long. I want to thank Monsieur and Madame Du Bois, I said, turning toward them, raising my glass slightly in their direction, for coming all this way to be part of this family. That's not a small thing. Flying across an ocean for people you barely know. Monsieur Du Bois dipped his head. Gracious. Practiced. The pleasure is entirely ours, David. I'm sure it is, I said. Something in my tone must have caught, because I saw Madame Du Bois' smile flicker. Just Barely, just at the edges. The way you notice a draft under a door you thought was sealed shut. Since our guest traveled all the way from Valencia, I said, turn to face the crowd, my voice steady and easy. I thought it only right to honor them in their native language, especially since they spent the last 3 weeks assuming I couldn't understand a single word of it. I looked directly at Monsieur Dubois. The color began to drain from his face. Continuo. The accent I buried for 25 years came out sharp and effortless. I watched Monsieur Dubois' glass freeze halfway to his mouth. Madame Dubois went entirely rigid. Durante tres semanas. Hablas mi hija como una transaction commercial. I said, my voice cutting to the quiet patio. Te ríes de mi trabajo. Insultes mi hogar, while amasa mi hija per decibel mientras tremabas robar mi tierra. For 3 weeks, you spoke of my daughter like a business transaction. You laughed at my work, insulted my home, and called my daughter predictable while plotting to steal my land. Marc-Antoine scrambled in his chair, his face flushed red. David stopped too. Marc-Antoine, I said, cold as steel. Shut up, Marc-Antoine. Lo intendi to do desde la primera noche en el restaurante. I turned back to the room and switched seamlessly back to English. I heard every single word. The words at the table, like a drop plate. 40 faces turned, first toward Monsieur and Madame Dubois, then toward me, then slowly toward Chloe, whose face had gone from confusion to something else entirely. Something breaking. Dad, she started, her voice small. What? I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I couldn't let you find out after the wedding either. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the folder Ethan had brought. The same kind of leather folder Monsieur Dubois had slid across my patio table 2 weeks earlier. Except this one didn't have a single lie inside it. 2 weeks ago, I said, laying open on the table for everyone to see, Monsieur and Madame Dubois asked me to sign a family trust. They called it estate planning. A gift, they said, a way to welcome us into the family properly. I flipped to the first page. What it actually was a transfer of my commercial waterfront property into an offshore holding entity controlled entirely by Monsieur Dubois. Gasped down the table now. Chloe's roommate covered her mouth. Ethan stood quietly near the drink table, letting me run this the whole way through. Monsieur Dubois' company back in Spain is a shell. I said, flipping another page. It's been collapsing for 2 years. There are tax liens against his estate going back further than that. And Marc-Antoine, I looked at him now, steady, no anger in my voice at all, just fact after fact after fact, has an active civil lawsuit against him in Spain for a failed business deal he never once mentioned to the woman he's supposed to be marrying in 2 weeks. That's not, Marc-Antoine started, half rising from his chair. David, that's not what it... I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made him sit back down. Chloe stared at Marc-Antoine now, waiting, really waiting. The way you wait for someone to prove you wrong about the worst thing you've ever thought about them. Marc-Antoine's mouth opened, closed, open again. Chloe, it's not what it looks like. She cut him off, and her voice, when it came, was calmer than I expected, colder than I'd ever heard from her. You called me cheap, she said. You laughed about my father's home. You made me a pawn in your family scheme. She reached down, slow, deliberate, and pulled the ring off her finger, set it down on his plate, right next to his untouched salmon. I was going to spend my life with you, she said, and you were going to spend yours robbing me. She stood, and instead of turning toward her friends, instead of running off the way anybody might have forgiven her for doing, she walked around the table to where I was standing. She didn't hide behind me. She stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. That's my girl. I turned back to Marc-Antoine, who still hadn't fully found his footing, his parents on either side of him, gone pale and silent, cornered by their own words, coming back to them in a language they'd never once imagined would betray them. I handed Marc-Antoine a second document from the folder, not the trust this time. That's an itemized invoice, I said, for every expense your family's accrued during your stay in my guest cottage, and a formal notice. You'll need to vacate my property by tomorrow morning. Monsieur Dubois found his voice first. thin and brittle. David, surely we can discuss. We discussed plenty. I said, in 2 languages, apparently. I just enjoyed it until now. I picked up my champagne glass, the one I'd raised at the start of all this, and took a slow sip, savoring it before setting it back down on the table with a small, deliberate click. Oh, and Monsieur Dubois, I said, I paid for tonight's dinner out of my peasant bank account. I'd say you're welcome, but we both know you don't mean it when you say thank you. I gestured toward the driveway, toward the guest cottage lit up gold across the yard. The same guest cottage I'd built with my own 2 hands. The same summer as that cedar chest. The guest cottage is unlocked, I said. You're welcome to stay there tonight, but I'd recommend calling a hotel instead. The breakfast is better. Nobody at that table said a word. Monsieur Dubois' jaw worked like he wanted to argue, wanted to salvage something, anything out of the wreckage. But there was nothing left to salvage. Not with a folder full of documentation, sitting open on the table. Not with his own son's words handed back to him in the very language he thought had made him untouchable. I looked down at Chloe. She looked up at me, tears standing in her eyes, but her jaw set steady. You ready? I asked her, quiet, just for her. She nodded. Together, we walked away from that table, past the string lights, past the wild anemones in their mason jars, past 40 stunned faces, and one folder that had just ended a con 2 people flew 6,000 miles to pull off. Behind us, I heard Madame Dubois' voice crack, high and desperate, calling after us. Words I didn't bother turning around to catch in English or Spanish. It didn't matter anymore. I'd heard everything I needed to hear from that family the first night, over paella, thinking I couldn't understand a word of it. You were wrong about a lot of things, Monsieur Dubois. But you were most wrong about this. Thinking a quiet man with calloused hands wouldn't know exactly what to do with the truth once he had it. Chloe slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the house, the same way she used to when she was small enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call a helping. Thank you, Dad, she said quietly, for hearing what I couldn't. Always, sweetheart, I said every single word. Behind us, the string lights kept glowing over an empty toast and a family that had come across an ocean to take something from us, and left instead with nothing but the sound of their own words, finally understood.